The wind carried dust that morning, rolling over the half-dead cottonwoods at the edge of town, a wind that seemed to whisper the same old judgment the townsfolk never tired of. That's her, the widow who shamed herself. Eliza Carrington walked with her hat brim low, boots scuffing through the hard dirt street of Jericho Bend. She was lean now, the fullness of a bride gone, her waist cinched tight by necessity more than vanity. In her satchel she carried a pistol and a folded scrap of cloth. The burned remains of her wedding dress, what little she'd saved after the fire that took her husband and left her with nothing but rumors. They said she'd left the lantern burning on purpose. They said she'd let him die. Folks were crueler than desert sun. Yet Eliza did not come back as a beggar. She came back as sworn deputy, wearing the tin star the marshal had pressed into her palm when he found her tracking horse thieves 2 counties south. The badge hung heavy on her breast, not polished, just dulled by the sweat of travel. She wore it plain, like a scar she chose to keep uncovered. And then there was him, Caleb Ryder, rancher, widower. His land ran alongside hers, once tangled in fence disputes and water rights before the fire had erased her claim. He'd been a Union scout in the war, a man who carried silence like a rifle, loaded, dangerous, and unwilling to set it down. Folks said he hated her more than any man alive, for reasons half-spoken in bar rooms and whispered along church pews. When she stepped off the dusty street into the saloon to post a new notice, Yauni's wanted men who'd been harrying stage lines, his shadow stretched long from a corner table. He didn't rise, just looked at her, slow and burning, like a man staring at a storm cloud he knew would break over his land. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, the air in Jericho Bend shifted. Not soft, not kind, but the kind of shift that meant the story of one woman's shame and one man's silence was far from over. And in Eliza's satchel, the torn cloth of her wedding dress seemed to weigh heavier than iron. The marshal's boots dragged across the boardwalk when he came to find her. Old Jameson, half blind, chest rattling like loose tack, but he'd kept this town stitched together through drought and bullets. "Eliza," he said, voice dry as gravel, "you keep to the law, not the past. Folks round here don't forget sins, real or imagined. Don't give 'em reason to pile on more." She touched the badge pinned to her chest. "Then let me prove myself by the law's hand. Justice don't care for gossip." Jameson studied her long, then glanced toward the saloon where Caleb Ryder still sat unmoving, hand around a whiskey glass that hadn't been raised. "Watch that one," Jameson muttered. "Hates you worse than rattlers. Yet, if trouble finds you, he's the one man won't run." Eliza frowned. She didn't need saving. Not from Caleb Ryder. Not from anyone. But Jameson's words bit like barbed wire. The one man won't run. Later, as the sun leaned low and spilled red over the plains, Eliza rode patrol. Her horse's hooves struck hollow against the dry earth, and every sound carried, a hawk's cry, the far-off laughter of men who'd been drinking too long, the creak of a windmill that spun without purpose. It was there she saw the smoke. Thin at first, then thick. She spurred her horse hard, rifle slung over her shoulder. A wagon lay crippled in a shallow arroyo, flames licking its canvas. 2 riders circled like wolves, masked, rifles glinting. Eliza leveled her rifle, heart hammering. "Drop it," she shouted, voice sharp as iron striking rock. But 2 against 1 left no mercy. A bullet cracked past her ear, close enough to shear a lock of hair. She hit the dirt, rolled, came up firing. One rider screamed and bolted. The other steadied, raised his gun, and then another shot split the air. Clean. Sure, not hers. The bandit tumbled from his saddle, dust puffing up where his body hit. Eliza swung around, and there on the ridge sat Caleb Ryder, rifle across his knees, smoke still curling from the barrel. Their eyes met again, this time over fire and gunpowder. He said nothing, just tipped his hat like a man paying respect to weather. He couldn't stop but knew how to ride out. The wagon burned behind her, but Eliza felt heat of another kind. The kind that comes when you realize your fiercest enemy might just have saved your life. The flames behind them sank low, wagon timbers collapsing into themselves with a hiss. Smoke stung Eliza's eyes as she dusted herself off, fury burning hotter than the fire. "You had no call to follow me," she snapped, tightening her grip on the rifle. "This was my patrol." Caleb rode down the ridge slow, his gelding steady under the crimson wash of dusk. He dismounted, boots crunching on scorched dirt. His face stayed carved from stone, only his eyes carrying that steady, relentless heat. "You'd be dead," he said, flat, certain, as if it were fact, not opinion. Eliza's jaw hardened. "And you'd like that, wouldn't you? One less scandal in town, one less widow, walking around with her husband's death tied to her name." His mouth twitched, not quite into a smile, not kindness either, more like the memory of bitterness he hadn't spat out yet. "You think I give a damn about their gossip?" Caleb said, voice low. "What I don't stomach is someone running headlong into a fight they can't finish." "I finished it," Eliza shot back, pointing to the bandit bleeding out in the dirt. "You grazed him. I put him down." The truth of it cut sharp. She hated that it was true, hated the way his voice carried not pride, but some stubborn sense of duty she hadn't asked for. The wagon's fire popped, throwing sparks skyward. Between them, silence thickened. Eliza shifted, pulled the charred scrap of her wedding dress from her satchel, and pressed it against the burning rim of the wreck as if to sear more of it away. Caleb's gaze fell on the cloth, and for the first time his eyes softened. Not with pity, but recognition. "You still carry that?" he murmured. Her hand trembled, but she kept her chin high. "I carry what's mine. What's left." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then back at the wreck. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "Fire don't just take. Sometimes it leaves you meaner, harder. Sometimes it leaves you ready to fight again." Eliza bristled. "You think you know my fight?" "I know the look of someone not ready to die," he said, pulling his horse's reins. "That's enough." He mounted without another word, riding off into the fading light, and Eliza stood there in the ashes, pulse still rattling, wondering if the man she swore was her enemy had just given her the first mercy she'd known in years. By morning, the town buzzed with the wagon fire. The preacher's wife whispered in the mercantile. Men at the blacksmith's anvil swore the raiders were part of a bigger gang. And everywhere Eliza went, she felt eyes cut her down, as though she had lit the fire herself. The marshal leaned heavy on his cane outside the jailhouse. "Raiders won't stop with a wagon," he told her. "They'll bleed the stage lines, then the ranches. We need someone who knows the backcountry, every draw and dry creek. And you," his gaze dropped to her badge. "You don't know it well enough." Eliza bristled. "I can read trail as good as any man." Jameson coughed, spat, and tilted his chin across the street. "He can read it better." There stood Caleb Ryder, saddling his horse with the quiet rhythm of habit, broad shoulders bent under the morning sun, his hands sure on the leather straps. He didn't glance her way, not once, as though she were no more than the breeze tugging at his coat. Eliza's voice sharpened. "I don't need him." "Maybe not," Jameson rasped, "but justice does." So it was that Eliza found herself riding beside the man she least wanted. They followed the faint scars of hoofprints cutting across dry earth, the dust still soft from where riders had pushed hard through the night. Caleb dismounted often, crouching low, fingers brushing the ground like he was listening to it speak. "You drag your heels," he muttered once, not looking at her. "You'll spook the trail." She bit her tongue, though heat flared in her cheeks. Every correction from him scraped raw, but still she matched his pace, learning the small things he never said plain. The broken mesquite branch meaning a horse brushed past, the deeper set of prints meaning one rider carried more weight. At sundown, they camped by a dry riverbed, a lone cottonwood twisting against the horizon. Caleb set no fire. Raiders might see. Instead, he cut strips of jerky, handed one across the dark to her without a word. Eliza took it slow, fingers brushing his for the briefest instant. Calloused, warm, alive. It startled her, that pulse of something human between them, quick as lightning, but enough to make her shift her eyes to the stars. For the first time, she wondered if the distance between them could be measured not in hate, but in steps yet taken. The night had gone still, too still. Coyotes should have been yipping in the far hills, owls calling through the dark. Instead, the silence pressed heavy as a hand over the mouth. Caleb stirred first. He sat up from where he leaned against the cottonwood, rifle already in hand, eyes scanning the dark. Eliza, half asleep on her bedroll, felt his sudden tension ripple through the air and jolted awake. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," he muttered. "Too many for strays." And then she heard it too. The faint, uneven thunder of hooves, distant but drawing closer. Raiders moving fast. Caleb's jaw clenched. He pulled her by the arm, rough but not cruel, guiding her deeper into the dry riverbed. The earth smelled of dust and old rain, cool against her palms as they crouched low. "They'll pass," he whispered, but the hoofbeats grew louder, and voices carried on the wind. Harsh laughter, the kind that came from men who had taken too much and feared too little. A lantern swung from a saddle, its glow licking across the bank above them. Eliza's hand found the pistol at her side. Her breath shook. "Don't!" Caleb hissed, his face so near hers she could see the faint scar running from his jaw to his ear, silver in the moonlight. "You fire, they'll all turn." The riders thundered past, shadows cutting across the stars. Dust rained down on them, clinging to Eliza's lips, her lashes. She froze, every muscle wound tight. Caleb's hand pressed against her back, steady, grounding, telling her without words to hold still. For a moment, time narrowed to nothing but his touch, the hush of his breath near her temple, the thrum of her own pulse. Then, as sudden as they had come, the riders faded into the horizon, their noise swallowed by distance. Silence returned, trembling at the edges. Eliza exhaled, sharp and shaky. Caleb's hand lingered a second too long before he pulled it away. "You're alive," he muttered, settling back against the bank. She turned her face toward him. Words caught in her throat. The hatred she thought she still held wavered, because hatred had no warmth, and his hand had carried plenty. For the first time, she saw not just the enemy rancher, but a man who had lost, endured, and still stayed when others ran. By dawn, the trail sharpened, hoof prints cut deep into the clay, ash from a small fire still warm where raiders had rested. Caleb crouched, pressing his fingers to the ground, eyes narrowing. "They ain't far," he said. Eliza's hand tightened around her rifle. "Then let's take them." He looked at her, steady as ever. "You rush in, you'll die. Wait, watch." But Eliza's blood ran hot. She'd carried shame too long, been spat on and whispered about too many years. Justice wasn't a word to her. It was the only way to breathe. She started forward. The crack of a branch snapped her still. A raider stepped from the brush, pistol already drawn. His grin split, crooked, teeth yellow. "Well, look what crawled in the law's pretty widow." Eliza raised her rifle, but too slow. The bandit shot went wide, because Caleb's bullet found his shoulder first. The man screamed, dropped to his knees, but the gunfire brought more. 3 shadows broke from the mesquite, rifles lifted. Chaos ripped the quiet apart. Bullets hissed, earth spit up around them. Caleb shoved Eliza down hard, covering her with his body as rounds tore bark from the cottonwood above. She could feel the weight of him, solid, bracing, not gentle but unyielding, like stone shielding her from a storm. "Stay low," he barked, rolling off just enough to fire back. One raider dropped, another scattered into the brush. Eliza lifted her rifle, breath ragged. She found the last man through the sights, squeezed, felt the kick against her shoulder. He staggered, fell. The silence after was deafening. Just wind and the moan of the wounded raider crawling away. Eliza sat up, chest heaving. Caleb knelt beside her, blood darkening his sleeve. "You're hit," she whispered. "Not bad." He tore his own bandana, pressed it to the wound without flinching. Eliza's hand shook. She reached to help, hesitated, then pressed her palm over his to steady the cloth. Their eyes met. Dust clung to his jaw, sweat to his brow, and still he held her gaze like it was something to anchor to. "You saved me," she said, voice hoarse. "You'd have done the same," he answered, though they both knew, without him, she'd be gone. And for the first time, she didn't hate the truth of it. They camped in the lee of a bluff, smoke hidden under stones, night pressing in cold. Caleb sat with his back against a saddle, shirt peeled down to the waist, blood seeping through a ragged bandage that had already gone dark. Eliza crouched beside him, the firelight brushing her face in amber. She had boiled water in a tin pot, her hands trembling though she tried to still them. "Hold still," she said. "Never been good at that," Caleb muttered, but he did not move when her fingers touched his skin. The wound was deep but clean, the bullet having passed through the muscle of his arm. Still, each time she pressed cloth to it, his jaw set harder, breath flaring through his nose. She worked slow, precise, not because she feared the blood, but because she feared the way touching him shook something loose inside her. Her hand brushed the scar across his ribs, pale against sun-browned flesh. She froze, eyes tracing its path. War, he said, voice low. Shrapnel. Took near a year to heal. Eliza swallowed. And still you fight. He looked at her then, eyes steady, shadowed. You think scars mean a man's finished? Sometimes they're the proof you're not. Her throat tightened. She thought of the burned scrap of her wedding dress, the way it seemed to whisper of failure every time she touched it. Proof, yes, but of what? Loss or survival? She tied the bandage firm, her knuckles grazing his chest. His hand came up, slow, hesitant. For a breath, she thought he would push her away. Instead, he laid it over hers, rough palm warm against her skin. You've got steady hands, he murmured. Eliza's lips parted, but no words came. The fire crackled, coyotes yipped faint on the horizon. She could smell him. Sweat, dust, iron. All of it real, grounding. She drew her hand back, quicker than she meant to. Get some rest. We ride at first light. Caleb leaned back, eyes closing, but a faint curve touched his mouth. Not mockery, something softer, reluctant. And Eliza, sitting in the glow of the flames, felt her heart beat not with shame or anger, but with something far more dangerous, the first stirrings of want. By the time they rode back into Jericho Bend, dust clinging to their clothes and blood dried on Caleb's sleeve, word had already run ahead of them. The raiders had been beaten back. And Eliza Carrington had ridden with Caleb Ryder to do it. The town gathered like crows on the boardwalks, faces pinched, whispering, eyes sliding sharp as knives. Eliza felt their judgment like stones in her pockets. Widow cursed by fire, shame in a badge. They would not let her forget. Caleb dismounted slow, leading his horse to the hitching post. He didn't look at the people, didn't tip his hat. He only walked to stand beside her, close enough that the heat of his body reached her through the dust of the street. The preacher's wife sneered. Some law woman, dragging decent men into her disgrace. The words cut deep, but Eliza didn't flinch. Her hand curled at her side, nails biting her palm. She wanted to spit back, to scream that she had fought, bled, and stood when no one else had. But her tongue held, heavy as stone. And then it happened. Caleb's hand reached across the narrow space and settled over hers. Rough, steady, certain. Not tender, not showy, just there. A simple act, but loud as thunder in the silence of the crowd. Gasps rippled. Whispers turned sharp. Yet Caleb didn't move. He looked straight ahead, jaw set, eyes unreadable. His thumb brushed once against her knuckles, the smallest gesture of defiance. Not against her, but against them. A child's voice broke the quiet. Little Samuel Ellis, no more than 7, tugged at his mother's skirt and pointed. She's the law now, Mama. She saved us. Why you whisper so mean? The woman yanked him close, face pale, but the words hung in the air like a bell struck hard. Eliza's chest ached. Her shame, her scraps of loss, all the weight she carried. For a breath, it lifted. Not gone, but shared. She looked at Caleb, but he still didn't glance her way. His hand stayed firm over hers, though, and in that grip was something she had never expected. A place to stand. For the first time in years, Eliza Carrington did not bow her head when the town watched her. They came at dawn, as Caleb had warned they might. Raiders, 6 of them this time, rifles glinting in the first gray light. The town bell clanged, dogs barked, women pulled children inside. Eliza stood in the street, rifle slung, the tin star catching what little sun broke over the rooftops. Caleb was beside her, horse already saddled, his wound bound, but his eyes steady. 6 against 2, she said. Done worse, he answered. The raiders thundered closer, dust rising like a storm. Eliza's heart hammered, but she did not step back. The crowd watched from the boardwalks, silent, waiting to see if shame would falter again. As the riders closed, Caleb fired first. One man tumbled from his saddle. Eliza's shot followed, clean, sharp, dropping another. The rest split, circling like wolves. Bullets tore splinters from the hitching posts, glass shattered from the saloon windows. Eliza crouched, breath ragged. Her satchel slipped from her shoulder, spilling across the dirt, and with it, the burned scrap of her wedding dress. It fluttered in the dust, torn, blackened, shame-made cloth. One raider's horse trampled it under hoof as he rode past. Her chest clenched. For years she had carried that piece as proof of what she had lost, what the town had branded her with. Now, here it was, in the dirt, crushed. Caleb's voice cut through the chaos. "Eliza!" She looked up, saw him pinned behind the trough, 2 raiders pressing hard. She grabbed the scrap of cloth, shoved it against the barrel of her rifle, and struck a match. Flames licked it quick, and she raised the burning rag high. The horse nearest her spooked, rearing, throwing its rider. Another bolted. Smoke swirled, fire trailing from her rifle like a torch. The crowd gasped. To them, it looked like defiance, like a widow burning her shame in the open. Caleb used the distraction to break cover, firing clean. 2 more raiders fell. The last turned tail, racing out of town, dust swallowing him whole. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of flame as Eliza dropped the burned cloth into the dirt and stamped it to ash. She stood tall, chest heaving, rifle still smoking. Caleb limped to her side, eyes locking on the blackened scrap at her boots. "You done carrying it?" he said. Eliza nodded, breath trembling. "I reckon I am." After the dust of battle settled, Jericho Bend returned to its murmurs. The raiders were gone, the threat driven off, but the air still held the weight of what had happened. Eliza walked with Caleb to the edge of town, where the prairie stretched wide and gold beneath the dying sun. His arm was bound tighter now, his movement slower, but he carried himself upright, unbent. They said little as they reached the line where her burned-out homestead once stood. Only a stone chimney remained, jagged against the horizon, blackened like the dress scrap she had finally let burn. Caleb paused there, resting his hand on the cold stones. "You gonna rebuild?" Eliza looked at the ground, at the weeds pushing through the ash. Her throat tightened. "I don't know how to start again." Caleb's eyes softened, though his voice stayed plain. "One board at a time, same way you mend a fence, same way you heal a wound." She met his gaze then, truly met it, and saw no hate there, only weariness, honesty, and something else. Something tender, reluctant, but strong as the land they stood on. Her hand lifted, brushing the bandage on his arm. For a moment she hesitated, then pressed her lips lightly to the edge of the wound, as if sealing it with something more than cloth. His breath caught, but he did not pull away. They stood there long, with only wind and the hush of the grass around them. Later, when night fell, a lantern glowed in the cabin Caleb offered her. Not his grand ranch house, not a gesture of possession, but a small, rough-hewn place where warmth could grow again. Together they laid the first board across the frame, hammer ringing like a promise in the dark. The town still whispered. They would for years. But Eliza no longer bowed under it, and Caleb no longer stood apart from her. Their proof was not in the crowd's eyes, but in the quiet fire they built together. A scar kissed, a hand held, a home lit with new flame. And so the story lingers, like all folktales told by firelight. What keeps a heart alive in the desert? A kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go? Please subscribe to my channel for more interesting love stories.